I'm the Executive Director of the J.M. Kaplan Fund, so welcome to Kaplan. We're so happy to have you here. While you're here, we hope you feel at home. My main job tonight is to tell you that the bathrooms are at the end of the hall. It's really, really important. The Masons have kindly unlocked them for us tonight, and that's unusual, so you're very, very special. Especially the women, they don't like to unlock the women's bathrooms. It's wonderful to have you here, and it is really, really wonderful to be with Municipal Art Society and to help them welcome I hope I'm going to get this right, the Ralph C. Menapace Fellow in Urban Land Use Law. And so this is a really special night. This is a big part of what MAS does. And at Kaplan, many of you know our longtime president and then President Emeritus Joan Davidson. And Joan loved the built environment of New York City. And she cared about equitable land use, she cared about climate awareness, she cared about community involvement in land decisions. And those are all the things that Municipal Art Society also cares about, and why we are so proud to be a founding supporter of MAS. And we're so pleased to have you all here, and especially to welcome Alex, who is going to take the MAS mission out into the streets, and I know just do a beautiful job. It is also really nice to have a new and new-ish face here, Carrie Butler, as the interim executive director of MAS. And Carrie, welcome to Kaplan. For all of you, welcome to Kaplan, and please make yourselves at home here and enjoy this evening.
Thank you. So I will try to speak loudly. I do not know if this microphone is working at all. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for coming, and thank you, Julia, and the J.M. Kaplan Fund for hosting us in this lovely event tonight. Kaplan has been a longtime friend and partner of MAS, thanks in part due to our shared goals of preserving cultural heritage and building a more resilient and livable city. And that friendship was deepened through the longtime efforts of Kaplan Fund leader and former MAS board member, the late Joan Davidson. And as Julia mentioned, the Kaplan Fund was an early supporter of the Menapace program about 40 years ago. So that's quite amazing, long time partnership. I want to take a moment to acknowledge MAS board members who are here. We have co-chairs Jill Lerner, Richard Olcott, and our directors with us tonight include Leslie Chang, Susan Winston-Carlin, Barbara Paley, Ken Swig, and Manny Patoli. And we also are honored to have with us Director Emeritus and former MAS President Ken Barwick, under whose leadership the Menapace. So the Menapace Fellowship shapes passionate thinkers into civic-minded urbanists. These law school graduates spend about 2 years with MAS, and their research is critical to supporting MAS's advocacy in planning and preservation policies that support New York City's many diverse communities. And it's an inspiration to see many alumni continue that fight in their careers afterwards. We're delighted to have several alumni here to join us in introducing Alex, the 18th Menapace Fellow. Can I have every former fellow raise their hand? Woo! Amazing. The first one. Okay, so I'll now turn it over to Susan Winston-Carlin, again, member of our board, and chair of the MAS Law Committee, to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Winston-Carlin, and I'm a board member of the MAS, and I'm also the chair of the Law Committee. I really want to extend my thanks to all of you for joining us this evening to welcome our current Menapace Fellow, Alex Israel. The Ralph C. Menapace Fellowship in Urban Land Use Law is a cornerstone of the Municipal Art Society's work. The fellowship was established in 1984 in honor of the distinguished lawyer Ralph C. Menapace Jr., who was the president and board chair of MAS. Through the fellowship, recent law school graduates engage in policy development and legal advocacy to help address issues in urban life. Past Menapace Fellows have played key roles in precedent-setting cases, including preventing St. Bartholomew's Church from replacing its landmark community house with an office tower in 1990. Defending the Brooklyn Museum's Sensation exhibit in 1999, and rejecting a proposal to build a luxury condo in residential Crown Heights in 2022. Alex Israel joined MAS as the 18th Menapace Fellow in September 2024. And just a personal note, I had a lovely lunch with her, and I think that she's an absolutely stellar person and a really good mind. Really good. She graduated in May 2024 from Fordham University School of Law, where she served as notes and articles editor for Urban Law Journal and filed a federal civil action on behalf of the Housing and Environmental Litigation Clinic. While in law school, she interned with the New York City Council, New York State Office of the Attorney General, New York Civil Liberties Union, and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She was a very, very busy person. Alex received her undergraduate degree from the SIU House School of Public Communications at Syracuse University in 2014. Before pivoting to a legal career, she worked as a marketing strategist and freelance journalist reporting on local politics in her neighborhood, Upper West Side, which I'm about to move to, so I'm going to come to Alex for all the ins and outs of living on the Upper West Side. Tonight, Alex will be in conversation with David Schnakenberg, one of my favorite people, who was the MAS Menapace Fellow from 2008 to 2010, and is now special counsel at Fried Frank. David also sits on the MAS Law Committee. I've been on my committee and get to see him every now and then. Moderating their discussion is Christopher Rizzo, another one of my favorite people, who was the Menapace Fellow from 2002 to 2004, and is now partner at Carter Ledyard and director of the firm's Enviromental Practice Group. Their conversation is sure to be thought-provoking and very, very interesting. But before the discussion begins, I would like to invite Alex to come up, give her the opportunity to talk about herself a little bit, brag on her, and tell us what she's thinking about. So thank you. And Alex.
Well, thank you, everyone who has spoken before me. Thank you, Susan, for that lovely intro. Thank you to the Kaplan Fund for hosting us all here, and thank you to you all for being here to listen to us. I'm really proud to be in this role. The people who have come before me are very highly esteemed in their various respective fields, so it's an honor to be continuing in their footsteps, and I look forward to speaking with some of them here tonight and speaking with them and sharing all of our work throughout my time as the fellow in the coming months. I'll be here for another 1.5 years, so you'll have me as the face of the fellowship for a while. If any of you hear anything tonight that piques your interest and you want to reach out or talk more about it, I'm always available. I am here basically to be a sounding board and to do legal research on behalf of the members and the board and the whole MAS organization, so that counts for you all too. So I appreciate you being here and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, I guess my job is to moderate these two fine fellows, one past and one present. But I wanted to give my own little introduction to the fellowship and add on what Kerry said and Susan said about it. We have had 18 fellows, and that's really a remarkable run for this fellowship. And I went and I sort of dug out the list of prior fellows to see what they had done and where they had gone. And with very few exceptions, every one of them, far more than I have, has gone on from the fellowship to make some really significant contributions to civic life or public life in New York City. John Lobier, the first fellow who's here, has had a very long and very important career engaging in public interest litigation for all sorts of clients. Liz Luskin, who is not here, has held a number of roles in New York City government, including running and really revitalizing the Long Island City Business Improvement District.
Who was that?
Liz Luskin.
She became the head of the district.
Yes, she was. Holly Light, who has had a number of remarkable roles in New York City government, New York State government, and federal government at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and is now running Madison Square Park. Amanda Hiller, is the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance for New York State, so be nice to her.
She's nice to us.
Katie Kendall, who was General Counsel to the Mayor's Office of Environmental Coordination. David Schnakenberg, over here, who was General Counsel to the Board of Standards and Appeals, my former enemy. And now has a really important career in the land use practice of Free Frank, working on so many of the city's biggest land use projects. Kimberly Ong, who's really fighting the good fight at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Jamal Martin, the predecessor to Alex, who is now in land use at Venable Law Firm. I've left out, obviously, a number of people. These are just some of the highlights that grabbed my attention, but what a remarkable list of colleagues for me and for Alex and for David. So therefore, I'm really excited to brainstorm a little bit about the fellowship, which I don't get a chance to think about, although it had a really, really transformative impact on my career in the 20 years that I've spent at Carter Ledyard Millward since leaving the fellowship. So I'm going to start by asking Alex and then David, what drew you to the fellowship? We all know it wasn't the pay, which is horrible, Carrie. But what drew you to the fellowship? You obviously had other opportunities with your amazing resume.
Well, I think for me, the reason I went to law school as a second career was all about making New York City the best version of itself. And when I came across an organization that had a mission that was basically aligned with exactly that, it seemed like the perfect fit, almost too good to be true. And when I found the fellowship, that they were willing to take a chance on a first year out of school, possibly not even an attorney yet, the willingness for an organization to put something like that out into the world and recruit for that was just really something special to me. And I think the fact that MAS is, a century plus years old contributes to this idea that the city evolves and the people who are working to fix it and make it better also can evolve with it. And so that really spoke to me as part of MAS's long-standing work and seeing that evolution happen over time.
So you had a 10-year career in marketing and journalism before the fellowship. This is a very distinguished person here. And including working for the Daily Beast, which I didn't realize until I Googled you preparing for tonight. And if you don't know what the Daily Beast is, they write some of the edgiest, greatest articles.
And their general counsel is here today.
I wasn't gunning for it. I didn't know that. How are you going to bring that background to the fellowship?
Yeah, I think something that I realized in law school is that communications is not always something that lawyers are trained to do in school. And that's something that I bring just inherently from that experience. I think there's a lot of focus in our field, this new field that I'm in, on advocacy and advisory capacity that a lawyer has, but I think being able to communicate to non-lawyers, to lay people, and to sometimes stakeholders and people who know about this, whatever this topic is, more than you, is a skill that I am able to bring from that experience in a
It's well said.
communications skill.
A lot of lawyers cannot communicate effectively, and I'm sure you'll be much better at it.
Hopefully.
So David, what drew you to the fellowship? This is kind of a softball for you because David is super passionate about land use law. It's really a softball question for you, but go ahead.
Well, it's funny because I am super passionate about land use law, but was not when I came to the fellowship. I didn't get the memo in law school. All my friends were working at large firms. I was a research assistant. I was just nerding out in the library the whole time. And my professor was like, "Hey, you need to get a job. You're going to graduate." And I said, "Well, what do you suggest?" And he said, "Well, my mentor is Vicky Bean, who's on this law committee, and she's she told me there's a fellowship that I think would be a good fit for you since all you do is read land use cases." And so I didn't apply for any other jobs. I just really got lucky on this one and sort of set my career based on wanting to meet Vicky Bean, who wrote my land use casebook. That was really it. So a little bit less formed than some of our other fellows when I got here.
Well, you've made up for it 20 years of practice since then.
20 years, Jesus.
Yes. It's 17 if that makes you feel better. I did the numbers.
Yeah, a little bit better.
So your predecessor, Alex, was passionate about affordable housing, and that is obviously an existential crisis facing New York City. What, in your view, are the other existential land use, environmental, real estate issues facing New York City, and what do you see your role at MAS in tackling those, other than affordable housing?
Yes, Jamal, who I don't know, he's here, hello. He did amazing work, and we talked a lot about that during our transition period about how I can incorporate some of that work into what I do. But in addition to that, I came into the role with an interest in climate resiliency work, and I think that too is a core issue of our time, especially in a city where we're surrounded by water. We know that there are projections for sea level rise in our lifetime that is not sustainable. And so I think coming into MAS with climate as an interest for me, there's an interesting space here to really focus on adaptive reuse and historic preservation as a tool in the climate resiliency fight that I think is often sort of an afterthought or done piecemeal. And I think I'm hoping to spend some of my time here researching how to really make that a robust strategy for the city and not just an afterthought.
Climate resiliency. You work on a lot of important land use projects, David. How is climate resiliency getting factored into all of these projects now? Not so much reducing carbon emissions, which is obviously critical too, but adapting projects to the risk of climate change and sea level rise.
Well, so unfortunately, I don't think projects are adapting quite as much as one would hope to sea level rise and to other climate challenges. But I do think that there has been sort of a recent change in zoning. There's the recent City of Yes for carbon neutrality, I think is what it's called. And so we're building into the zoning code things that will make it easier for like the no-brainers, right? So you can cover a roof with solar panels, which you couldn't do before. I think there was a 25% cap, and now it's uncapped. There are mechanisms that will encourage developers to build efficient buildings. And so they're not really building flood walls so much as they are building ultra efficient buildings, which should be less impactful. I think that's what we're seeing more of, because that's what the zoning is encouraging.
What do you think the city should do with its zoning to require the adaptation and resiliency in new projects? If they're not doing it, obviously it's not happening robustly enough now.
Yeah, so I think we need to give it a little bit of time to see how these sort of carrots are working, right? So there's the green fast track for certain residential projects can now be a type 2 action, right? Which is going to take some time out of the development process, which takes some cost out of the development project. That's something that developers are looking to, and I think it's actually a program that's already, a lot of people are working towards getting in. So I think we need to give a little bit of time for the carrots to work and to get developers to be building better buildings, more efficient buildings, and to take advantage of some of these programs. In terms of, mandating compliance with higher codes, I think it's a great idea. I think we're targeting 2027 for a more stringent, like electric code and gas code, but at the same time, the city is very hesitant to tell you what to do with your property, right? That's always the tension that we see in land use, right? Is you've got this great balance of ownership and sort of we own our property. That's a fundamental thing, and you've got what the scope of government regulation can be, and sort of MAS kind of said that because historic preservation is really the
You are teeing up my next question perfectly.
Let's get to it.
Well, the tension between landmarks, let's pivot off environmental, the tension between landmarks and private property. So when you were a fellow, you worked on preserving the St. Vincent's Hospital campus, essentially requiring the developer to preserve a couple of buildings that the developer really did not want to preserve.
Yeah.
You worked on the city and suburban housing case where the owner of these landmark, low-rise, east side 16th Street apartment buildings was allowing them essentially to fall apart in hopes that he would get authority to demolish them. When I was fellow, I worked on a really small, niche project which involved the wall in Soho. And I don't know if any of you know what that is, but it's a modern art sculpture that's installed vertically, horizontally on the side of an old cast iron building in Soho.
Which one?
Broadway and Broadway. And it's Houston Broadway. And the building was designated as part of the Soho landmark district. And time went on, the sculpture was there at the time of designation, it deteriorated, the owner wanted to take it off and put up a billboard. The billboard would make him a lot of money, the sculpture was making him no money. And the Landmarks Commission denied the application to remove it, and the owner sued, claiming that it violated his First Amendment rights of free expression. Essentially, that requiring this artwork to be remain installed on the side of his building was forcing him to engage in artistic expression that he did not want to engage in. And I brought the case to MAS and I said, we have to submit an amicus brief here, because if this guy can get away with tearing this down under the guise of First Amendment rights, then any artistic adornment on a landmark building is at risk under the same theory. And thankfully, I guess you let me, Kent, submitted an amicus brief, and the federal court denied the claim, thank God. And on appeal, it was also denied, and the landmarks law was really saved. Anyway, I share that story as a really important example of how MAS gets involved in this tension between private property and the public good and the landmarks law. And maybe you can riff a little bit, David, on the tension between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tension. Landmarks typifies it, right? So you've got zoning, really, you hear these, you go back to cases like Euclid being the realty and other sort of fundamental cases, and what you're seeing is that at some level, the regulation of private property was held to be part of the police power. And that police power has like a couple of checks, right? You can exercise the police power and affect other people's property, but you can't violate their due process, and you can't take their property such that you're violating the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. You're affecting and taking. So there's this big police power, and then there are these checks on the police power. And landmarks, I think, in part because it is the least obvious use of the police power, and also because of some of the cases, is really what has sort of formed the contours of that authority to zone and regulate property, which is why it's super interesting. It's super fun to focus on landmarks cases, even if you're not, a huge devotee of certain facade types, right? It's very important. So that's why this is such a fun job, and you get to think about such good stuff. So your question was to sort of talk about the tension between private property and regulation. It's a real tension. I think that there are a lot of developers who would love to be wholly unregulated, but those developers tend to want to build in places that are quite regulated. So there's a cognitive dissonance there. landmarks is great for the city. Landmarks, I think, is probably great for the environment. And so that regulation is something that I think most property owners have accepted at this point. And it's largely because of MAS and sort of, to your point, Alex, communicating that to stakeholders and to lay people is super important, super difficult. I'm terrible at it. Nobody wants to hear you say, doctrinally when they ask a question.
I was getting nervous when you went into Euclid.
Yeah, so like having somebody who can sort of be an ambassador for the landmarks law or for speaking about the importance of government regulation for whatever it's public, housing, environment, landmarks. It's really
There's definitely a renewed hostility towards the landmark law.
Yeah.
Or low-density zoning in New York City because of the affordable housing crisis in the city.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to point the finger at the landmarks law, even though landmarks law only protects 2% of the city's geography, more or less? 4%, okay. A de minimis amount in the grand scheme of development in New York City. I want to get at a different question. There's a tension for fellows because MAS has a traditional landmarks mission, a traditional urban planning and zoning mission, and an environmental mission, which is probably newer to the organization, let's say the past 20 years. How do you see yourself balancing that tension between the traditional areas of focus of MAS and climate resiliency, which is obviously a passion of yours?
I think that MAS is well positioned to embody all of these different areas, and I think that as the times have, like I sort of started with, I think as the times have changed and the needs of New Yorkers have changed, MAS has changed with them. And so I think now MAS can serve, and the in-house counsel, the Menapace Fellow in this role can serve as a sort of connector among other maybe less willing or open organizations who we've partnered with in the past and who have missions that are not as varied and able to evolve as ours is, and kind of bring them along on that journey through that communication and through the institutional knowledge of being an organization that has withstood the test of time and the changes of New York. And so I see the Menapace Fellowship role as just a young person who's here, not coming necessarily from any particular world, but stepping into the intersection of all of these different worlds. And that role can kind of push some of that forward, I think.
David? You had the experience of navigating these three areas of law.
Yeah, it's tricky. I was probably the least. I think, Chris, actually, you were the first Menapace Fellow who really focused, I think, on environmental law. That was sort of.
But there was a reason for that, because Michael Girard was the general counsel and the chair of the law committee at the time. He is very much is a prominent environmental lawyer, and he helped set the tone.
Yeah, I think that's right. But you and Katie really sort of, I think, opened up the door for MAS as sort of environmental advocacy. And it's very obvious in a lot of ways that MAS, which has been sort of this one of the leading voices in the city for important issues throughout its history, to include sort of that spoke of the wheel.
Yeah.
At the same time, one of the reasons MAS has always had so much success is because it stayed in a pretty particular lane and was a leader in that lane. So I think there's tension both, like there's broad tension between things like preservation and environmentalism, although it need not be, because the disconnect is not actually as stark as people think. But also for sort of, there's mission creep is the thing that you have to worry about. So I think MAS has evolved. I think that MAS does have more expertise than for instance, when I was there. And that, environmentalism, green buildings, it's sort of now part of land use generally.
Right.
But historically it has not been part of the fellowship. It's interesting to see it sort of evolve that way.
It certainly has become integrated into urban planning and land use in a robust way. So I guess the fellowship has to evolve to meet that challenge. I saw Elizabeth Goldstein, I think. And one of the great things that Elizabeth did when she was president is she agreed to take on some affirmative litigation. And that's something that MAS has traditionally shied away from, although I was always excited about doing it. Because being a plaintiff in litigation is no joke. There are risks and responsibilities. But along came a case several years ago, 200 Amsterdam, where the developer of a large new building was essentially trying to buy zoning rights, air rights from this absurdly gerrymandered zoning law, taking scraps of air rights from over here and over there and over there. The Department of Buildings, arguably against its own very clear policies, approved the building project, and you agreed to sue over it. And I was so impressed with MAS in that moment that it was willing to do that. And I guess you won in the trial court and then lost in the appellate court, but it didn't matter because the Department of Buildings changed its policy to something more reasonable. I think I got that right. So in today's world, with the federal government that we have today, which is quite scary, and the disorganized city government which we have, which hopefully will resolve itself in the next election, we need advocates like MAS to be willing to fight. And sometimes fighting means litigating. So I know that that was a big part of what you did when you were a fellow in various ways, and I want you to maybe just talk about the organization and when it's right to litigate, to take on the ultimate fight, which is going to court.
Sure. Well, so when I was at MAS, we were amicus. We were not often the plaintiff. I was the fellow during a sort of a funny time. Kent, who had been sort of our leader, had stepped down halfway through my fellowship, and the new leadership was very sensitive about rubbing it in the wrong way. And so we really had a hard time getting people on board for litigation, but there were a couple cases that we thought were really crucial to the preservation of the landmarks law. And I say her name hasn't been mentioned, Dorothy Miner, who was an attorney with MAS and the drafter of the landmarks law, and just like so absolutely fundamental to what MAS was and what I think it is. She passed away at the start of my fellowship, and there was real panic that nobody knew the landmarks law, that without Dorothy to correct everything that was every misstep, and Dorothy was terrifying. So she really corrected the misstep. I mean, I remember during my interview, she yelled at me, paused the meeting to go move her car across the street, came back in the interview and started yelling at me about my position on eminent domain. So like, really just a force. And so we were so worried that the landmarks law was going to be eroded if we didn't take a stand. But what we did, and again, taking it back to communications, is we wrote these briefs. We got a lot of stakeholders involved. We got the National Trust to sign on to our amicus briefs in the St. Vincent's case, I think also in the Stahl case. But more important than our brief was the 2-page summary that we wrote to the MAS board, which we then leaked to all the newspapers, that sort of explained why this is so important. And so the litigation, to the degree that MAS moved the needle in St. Vincent's, like I like to think that we did, but I don't know. But I do know that we got a lot of people understanding the issue. And so litigation sort of in concert with the public education piece was really important. I think that was useful and a good role for MAS, right? So litigating, super important, educating, super important, but there's a concentration of expertise in the MAS community, and those are two ways to really sort of share that and flex that in this group.
That's very good. I know that we're short on time, but are we supposed to take some questions? Okay. So, how much time do we have for questions? Just give me a 5-10 minutes. Okay.
I'm Bobby Bailey, I'm on the board. Alex, with your experience in journalism, we need new language to replace DEI and sustainability. Will you help us with that?
Yeah. I do think, I was talking with Mike Gerard actually about the terms adaptation and mitigation as it relates to climate, and his solution to that sort of language is resiliency. That word seems to be relatively safe, like building more resilient cities is something that everyone can agree we need to do. It doesn't get maybe you don't have to put climate in front of it, and you can kind of use it as a code word. So
Yeah.
that one, I don't know. Inclusivity seems like something everyone should be able to get behind, you would think. And I'll work on that one.
I think the MAS should be the leader in this language. We have that opportunity for other institutions and other companies. Let's be the leader.
Yeah, hi Alex, I'm Mark Strauss, I'm on the planning committee. And my question is, I'm curious about, we've heard about others and their passions and what they brought to the position. I'm curious about what your passion is and how you see your role emerging as a passion.
Yeah, I mean, my passion, I have tried to distill this, talk about a communications problem. I think I just love New York. I love being a New Yorker, and I live on the Upper West Side, so I have the privilege of a neighborhood that has a lot of resources put into it and a lot of people fighting a good fight in my neighborhood. Not everyone in New York has that experience, and I think I came to law school from having reported on local politics, saw how it worked, and wanted to just play a more active role. I didn't want to be just reporting on it, I wanted to be in it, and I wanted to be shaping policies that I feel can benefit all New Yorkers, not just the rich white ones who live on the Upper West Side. So that was what drew me to law school, and I think this type of fellowship is the exact right place for me to be for 2 years to explore what that could look like in a number of different ways. I think litigation is great. We don't have any ongoing that I'm aware of, although I'd love to be a part of one someday. But I think research and policy briefs can play a role in pushing the needle too, and I think being able to just have the freedom to do some independent research, talk to as many people as possible, diagnose some of the problems, is allowing me to live out my passion for just making New York City better for everyone.
You draw out your response to that a really important additional tension in MAS, which has always been between Manhattan and the outer boroughs, and I think that MAS in the past decade has tried to really focus on the city as a whole and the outer boroughs, and that's always a challenge for you because there are voices in MAS who want you to focus here and others who want you to focus there, and so it's good that you're aware of that from the get-go.
Hi, I was wondering, David and Chris, in relation to Mark's question, what is it that, given your experience in MAS and your illustrious careers after MAS, what advice can you give Alex in front of all of us about creating a body of work while she's at MAS that deals with MAS, but also that Alex can take with her in her future life outside of MAS?
Thanks, Tom.
2 years goes fast, and in the arc of a really long career, it's not a lot of time. And so to me, it was really fundamental, and I don't think I realized this until about 12 months in, that I needed a signature project and a signature mission and a signature cause that I was going to make a mark on, both to feel good about myself and feel like I had accomplished something meaningful, but also to enhance my job prospects later. And I decided to go after the Board of Standards and Appeals and a practice which had really become inherently corrupt and dysfunctional. And I think that the report that MAS put together, which was based on data and research, changed the organization. But I think that's probably my best advice, is figure out early on what your signature project is going to be, because you only have 2 years to get it done.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. The advice I give everyone is just like, remember that you're sitting here dying and you enjoy yourself. That's the first one. But the second one is, when you're an attorney, you've got this career in front of you, you're not always going to be asked to sit and think of like the absolute best answer. You're going to have to win, you're going to have to defend the position that you may have advised differently and to be on the ground floor. MAS was the only time in my career where someone said like, hey, could you just like sit in a room and think about like what the absolute best answer to this is? And that is such a gift because you're not worried about anything other than just like figuring out the best. So that's a great way to approach the fellowship, is without the pressures of a client or a city to defend, and just to really think about what's the best outcome. So I would do that.
Gentlemen, right there, yes.
Hi, I'm Manny, I'm one of the board members. I also teach at the data science. So you brought up the idea of data research. One of the folks here is Ron, right there, right? They're thinking about planning and analytics, right? So as a person that's looking at this, teaching on data-driven methods for policy evaluation, I'm looking ahead, not reflecting on what has happened in the past. How are you looking at really becoming maybe the next level of a multidisciplinary fellow, right? That's looking at embodying maybe machine learning with some policy analysis, or thinking about those other things as we are looking ahead of what MAS can do in terms of data and research, and also combining some of the skills that the new wing is having in terms of, data science and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a former journalist, my approach is always to research everything first and to do a lot of citing to the people who have already done the research and compiled the data. So I usually start from a place of exploring what has already been achieved and factor that into basically anything I write, any output I have. But I do think collaboration is also a big part of my approach, and just pulling in people. I have already asked Rana about maps and what exists in the data sets that she's working on every day to see where there could be overlap among the two of us, because she is also doing her own sort of independent research and compiling. And so I think collaboration is something that the fellowship is really good at promoting, and making sure that I'm collaborating with people who have these areas of expertise and technical ability outside of mine is something that's really important to me.
Have you identified either an area or a conflict, probably not a case, but if you haven't identified a case, something that you're like, ooh, this is the thing that I want to work on, kind of what Chris is speaking to, like, have you found a project that you're like, we should dig in here? Or you think you might, and if not, if you haven't found that, can you imagine, I guess, what that will be, or where you will be looking for that?
So something that's come up a lot in my first 6 months of conversations is funding and a lack thereof for a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And so I think I want to take my research in a direction where I'm exploring what are the existing funding sources for this resiliency and infrastructure work. I mean, we're in a world now where federal support is not as guaranteed as it once was. State support also can be taken away. And so how historically have we relied on those types of sources? And then, part two of that being, how can we use the city's local authority or, improve the city's local authority to create those funding sources for ourselves to move that work forward and progress, even if others are kind of dragging their feet. And so that's, at least early on, where I see the most inherent, like a blank spot in my research.
That's a really important area, because you think of local law 97 in New York City, which is a very, it's an important law, it's a good law, I support it in concept. But in the next compliance period, when the carbon emission levels for buildings in New York City drop down in 2029, it's going to be really hard for most buildings in New York City to comply with those limits. And if they don't, they'll be paying some really hefty fines. And the sort of the technology to comply, like electric fired boilers in buildings, is not as advanced and it's very expensive. And how are these buildings going to do it?
Hopefully I'll have an answer for you in a year and a half.
In the back.
Rick Bell, combining a couple of the things that were just said, including way back, Alex, your point about impending or current possibilities of litigation. One of the issues of funding and environmental issues that is very much in the news every day now is congestion pricing. Do you see that as a potential project for both for
I feel like that's more of a question for Carrie. I am very in favor of supporting, and the MAS is too, in favor of supporting congestion pricing in any way we can.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's our role to
Well,
litigate
MAS
it.
we are part of the congestion pricing coalition, and we had a recent op-ed, which I can share if you want, supporting congestion pricing, and we're continue to support it in that it's working so far. I mean, it's only been a couple of months, and it's been raising money, and it's been reducing traffic, and we're hoping we actually have a congestion pricing coalition meeting tomorrow, so finding out more.
Sounds like an amicus brief for me.
There could be some legal situation, yes.
You have until March 21st.
Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, I don't know if it's really a question, but I feel, I was the first Menapace fellow, and Kent was president or chairman of the board, or what were you exactly? I forget the fact. And I never felt any kind of limit on whether we could challenge certain rules or regulations or develop particular development projects. And in fact, we did do some affirmative litigation. We challenged Mort Zuckerman's plan to build a much taller building on Columbus Circle than the one that's there now. We also joined with the city in a couple of, but not only in the St. Bart's case, but also in getting a decision from the courts ordering the demolition of, I think it was 9 stories from a building that was taller than it was supposed to be. But now I feel that the times have changed, and there's such a pressure to allow any kind of housing, be it luxury or affordable housing. And I'm wondering, there's really an attack on regulation, on land use regulation per se. And it comes from the left and it comes from the right. And I wonder, I don't know, this isn't really a question for you, but I would hope that MAS would be working to combat the idea that land use regulation is the cause of the housing crisis, which I think is such a dominant narrative now. And I don't think building taller buildings everywhere, luxury housing, is going to resolve the affordable housing crisis. But I guess it's not really a question, but I'd be interested in what you think about that issue.
Density is often cited as another potential sort of response or approach for climate resiliency, making existing buildings even potentially, like office conversions, for example. Just increasing the density on what we already have is cited as a way to just be more climate efficient. So density as it relates to housing, I think, is something that I'm hoping to explore as part of my research. So I definitely will seek to find a middle ground and not necessarily disparage the laws that got us here.
That is a debate which divides many people, density versus preservation. Divides close colleagues. They're next to each other in the same office. My personal view is it's sort of a false choice that's being presented to the city, which is probably evil. Any other questions? One in the way
I
back.
was wondering, has there been any research done on actual tall buildings and how well they are doing in terms of climate, cleanliness or whatever? Because a lot of them have Ds on them.
I was just going to say, you'd be surprised. I think it was the Durst building, which is across from Bryant Park, which was designed to be LEED Gold, LEED Platinum. And under the current fine system under Local Law 97, is going to be paying some really hefty fines in 2029 which is,
Isn't that because of a change in use and some kind of
I-
data center in there that's sucking a lot of power?
I don't know, that could be the
I read
reason.
something about
I was
that.
just very surprised to see
It is
that.
really surprising.
It was designed to be the opposite
Right.
of what it apparently is going to be. But it's not sort of an anecdotal answer to your question.
I will be following the local law 97 reporting and trying to get data from following the deadline in May, at least, to just make sure that we have some baseline for what is happening as we move into more strict goals. But
Yeah, my concern are not the big office towers who obviously have affluent landlords and owners behind them. I am personally seeing that a lot of small co-op buildings and apartment buildings are having a lot of challenges facing local law 97. That's where I'm worried. I can think of my own co-op building, which is going to face fines in 2029 of $90,000 a year or something like that, which is significant for a small co-op.
Co-ops, they don't have enough money to really operate.
You're talking about upgrading heating systems, which could easily be $1 million to go from a gas-fired boiler to an electric-fired boiler. And with one of the problems in New York State is in New York City is we've been counting on offshore wind to come online and lower our carbon footprint dramatically. But the market is really bad for offshore wind, and Donald Trump has come along and issued an executive order to prohibit new offshore wind, which is in federal waters. And so that assumption that our grid, that our electric grid is going to get really clean really soon is no longer a good assumption. We have to find another way to do it. There's a question there.
I'm not sure if it's a question. I'm Jill Lerner, I'm co-chair of the board, and first I'd like to say welcome. And I haven't really met you, even though you've been here for 6 months, and it's great to have you and hear your thoughts. But on the local law 97 issue per se, I was on the mayor's advisory committee for local law 97, and it is a complex issue in terms of who pays for it and how much it costs, and so as you're citing. But also, in the case of the Durst building, the LEED system is a design-based system. You get a price and you get a rating for how you design a building. And that includes providing bicycles and showers and doing lots of other things that are all great and are all, in the big scheme of things, really working towards sustainable goals and a sustainable lifestyle. But Local Law 97 is specifically about emissions, exactly what you emit, period.
Right.
And so whereas LEED is a design-based system, Local Law 97 is an actual emissions-based system, and the other big difference is emissions. It's for emissions for all buildings, whether they're existing or new. Whereas LEED, it's completely optional. You know, you can if you're building a new building, you might have to meet a LEED standard, but if you're in an existing building, you don't have to do anything unless you're doing something. But so they're just two completely different sets of measurements. So it's very easy for a building to have been designed under one system and then the rules changed. And that's where the legal question could come in. Like if you really met all the rules that were in place under one system, and then the rules change, and then suddenly you would have designed your building differently if those rules were in place at that time. I mean, nobody's really approached it from that standpoint, but it is interesting.
So far, the legal challenges to Local Law 97 have failed. Maybe they'll make it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have a different.
And I would also say the city really did try to think about making it equitable. There was a huge, equitable justice representation on that Local Law 97 committee, advisory committee, and I don't know that it was I think it's a tough challenge. The answer is it was really tough. But
Thank you.
It was on people's minds.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Maybe we have time for one more. I'm being told one more question. Oh, excellent final question.
This one's for Alex. I know that you started your Menapace blog that will be here quarterly. So do you have any ideas for the next one? Or is there a theme to your...
thank you for plugging the Menapace memo. I did the first one on New York State's cumulative impacts law, and it was just kind of a deep dive into what that law means for the city, because I didn't really see much fanfare once it took effect. So feel free to read that at your leisure. It's about 5,000 words. But for the next one, I'm thinking about, I guess, the second quarter. I was thinking about doing Local Law 97 and kind of talking about the reporting deadline, what that means, you know, what compliance looks like now, what it is projected to look like in the future based on the reporting. But the idea of the Menapace memo generally is just separate from my, you know, more focused research topic to go deep on relevant issues that relevant to the fellowship generally, and just give an opportunity to inform MAS members and internally on some niche legal issues. So thank you for the plug.
That's great. Well, I want to personally thank you, Alex, and David, for being part of the panel, and thank the Municipal Art Society for having this fellowship, which has launched 18 great careers, including mine. I'm deeply, deeply indebted to the organization. And so thanks to all the board members and committee members that are here and who are not here for what you have done to sustain this organization and the fellowship for the past 40 years. So thank you.
Joining us, and I do want to just really quickly thank MES staff who orchestrated the event, including Sarah Tomatano, Wagner, and Tina McCain. And finally, I want you all to consider supporting the Menapace Fellowship Program. We do seek support to continue the program, to continue supporting fellows and their work, because as I mentioned before, it is really critical to MES's advocacy. And if you are interested in supporting it, you can speak with Sarah, either tonight, enjoy the reception, enjoy the food, or reach out to Sarah in the future. Thank you so much.